Thank you very much, everyone. Shalom. This morning, Ken Rubin was brave enough to admit to us his almost non-existent understanding of Hebrew. Mine is worse. So I've been coached in a few words. My youngest sister, Susan, has actually been here many times, as have I. This is my second time, so many is not the right word, but my youngest sister's been here many times and has actually served with your military in one of your medical units for a while. And so she gave me some advice, which I'll share throughout this talk. But she also advised me to say Toda. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for the wonderful gentleman who's drawing. If you could take 20 kilos off, I'd appreciate it. And if the camera person could also shrink in a bit and take 20 kilos off, I'd also appreciate it. Because it's a lot easier than dieting. So anyways, what can you do? So what I would like to do today is talk about beyond failing fast. So this is the Beyond Agile Conference, and so we should always be looking at what is beyond. So one of the tracks today was people sharing their experiences, failing fast and failing at what they're doing and learning from that and thereby improving the way that they work. So my advice here today is if you want to be successful at transformations, if you truly want to change, we need to get better than fail fast. So I will, and it's not fail faster, that's not the answer. So anyways, I'll share some ideas here. So what's the plot? So I'm going to start with a little bit about me, fill in where I'm coming from. I'll then get into some observations and questions. So this will be the thinking part and maybe the uncomfortable part of my talk here today. And then I'll get into solution mode. So how do we actually apply some of these ideas and observations that I'm going to make? And I'll share with you strategies that I've been applying at organizations around the world for many, many years, and hopefully help you to break out of method prison. I would argue that many of us are in method prison at the present moment and don't realize it. So I'll actually start with that observation. So anyways, first of all, I want to admit I survived Shabbat. It was interesting when I told people I was going to be coming here. People always ask, what are you going to do? You can get some time to enjoy the country and go sightseeing, and of course I will. It's a beautiful country. And then people started asking me, so when are you going to come? When do you arrive? So I'm going to fly direct on Air Canada from Toronto, my home city, and I will arrive on Saturday morning. And then it's, you're arriving on Saturday? Oh no, that's Shabbat. You may die. What? And I've been to Israel before, so I know what they're talking about. And Toronto has several large Jewish communities. I live about 2 blocks away from one, so I have noticed over the 15 years that I've lived in that neighborhood that things close down on Saturdays because people are enjoying time with their families. So I've noticed these things. So anyways, I had numerous people explain what Shabbat was all about, including the conference organizers, because the underlying message, of course, was, Scott, you're completely useless, and there's no possible way that you could survive an entire day with some things being closed and some people not serving your every random whim. So luckily I came prepared, and here I am today. I managed to survive the horrors of Saturday in Tel Aviv. So thank you. It was close call, but I, in fact, managed to survive. So who am I, other than a mediocre comedian? I've been doing this Agile stuff for about 20 years now. I was the thought leader behind the Agile modeling and Agile data methods from the early 2000s. It's interesting, some of the techniques that we take for granted today, like modeling and sketching on whiteboards and using Post-it notes to manage our time and to model, those are radical concepts in the late 90s and early 2000s, completely and utterly radical. So we wrote them up in Agile modeling and many other good ideas. Over the last 10 years, though, I've been working on the DA toolkit. I'll be talking a little bit about that. Recently, I joined PMI, the Project Management Institute. So it's easy to beat up on project managers, and arguably they've got it coming a bit. But we need to stop that as a community. We need to start showing a little bit of respect and start understanding that maybe we could work with the project managers and learn from them and help them to learn and help them to get better. Because I've been hearing this us versus them rhetoric for 2 decades now, almost 2 decades in the Agile community, and it hasn't gone away and hasn't solved the problem. So maybe we should do something a little bit different. So I'm gonna step up and work on that. Because arguably, I did step up in the past and work with those evil modelers, and I've worked with those evil data people, and I've done my best to help, and I'm going to help with the project managers, I hope. We'll see. So anyways, I'd like to start with some observations and ask a few questions and then I'll maybe answer them, or maybe I won't. You'll have to think for yourself on that one. So this is a wonderful quote from Ivar Jakobsen. For the last couple of years, he's been talking about this concept that he calls method prison or method jail. And his fundamental point, which they make very well in this really good book. It just came out a couple months ago. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I suggest it. It's a great book. And his fundamental point is that these methods, these frameworks that we're all familiar with, they solve a certain problem. Like Scrum solves a certain problem, SAFe solves a certain problem, Kanban solves a certain problem. But then once you've solved those problems using that method, using that framework, you're pretty much stuck in method prison. There's all this wonderful marketing rhetoric, it's the art of the possible. Actually, politics is the art of the possible. But anyways, we'll misquote that. And they all wave their hands, and they all say, yes, start here, and then you can evolve from there. You can do anything you want with our method, with our framework. And yes, that's in theory possible. But in reality, that doesn't really happen very much. There's a reason why this conference is 15 years old, and we're still talking about beyond agility. And I suspect this conference will be going 15 years from now for the same freaking reasons, because most of us are in method jail. How do we break out? And I'm going to end this presentation with how do we break out of this. So anyways, why is there a method jail? What actually happens in practice? So we adopt a method, we adopt a framework. It doesn't really matter what method or what framework you adopt. This follows the same sort of learning curve. There's this initial learning curve where we actually become less productive because we're learning, and it takes time to learn. We have to get training, get some coaching, have to sort of stumble about, do a lot of failing. So after a few weeks maybe, we bottom out. And then assuming things go well, things get better, and we actually become more productive than we were. Fair enough, right? Because this method or this framework that we adopted solves some sort of problem that we perceive to have. So assuming that we adopt it properly, things get better. But then it peaks out. We hit the limit. So whatever problem that method or framework solved, well, we've now solved it, and we've pretty much peaked out. So we are where we are. Things are better, but how much better? And there's wonderful marketing rhetoric, depending on who you ask for, you get 10 times productivity improvement. And I've actually seen that in practice. If we have a team that's just phenomenally incompetent, then yes, it's fairly straightforward to pretty much do anything and see major improvements. But most teams are not phenomenally incompetent, and most teams just get a little bit of a boost, and that's about it. So how much of a boost? So I'm a numbers guy. I'm a bit of a quant. For years, I did research. I've stopped that recently because other people, in particular one gentleman that I'm about to quote from, frankly, have been doing a better job. So I did the best I could for a while and sort of led the field for a while. But then other people have gotten better, so I don't need to do that work anymore, or at least I'm not going to do as much of it. So this is from some research that a gentleman by the name of Dr. Don Reifer has done. He earned his PhD exploring how effective is Agile. And then he went and turned it into a business, and he's been doing research now for years and selling the research and consulting and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things I really like about Reifer's work is he doesn't have an axe to grind. So he's not a Scrum guy, he's not a SAFe guy, he's not a Kanban guy. He's just a guy doing research. He's trying to answer the question, how does this stuff actually work in practice? He's not selling you anything. Well, he's selling you his data. Other than that, he's not really selling anything. He's trying to sell you answers. He's not trying to sell you prescriptions. He's not trying to sell you methods. And what's interesting is his study, and this is from thousands of projects now. I think he's over 2,000 in his recent publication. maybe even 3,000, I don't know, but it's certainly more than what I'm quoting here. What he's found is that these Agile methods, these Agile toolkits, are really only, methods and frameworks are really only achieving, on average, 7 to 12% productivity increase. That's okay, that's a good bump, but it's certainly not these major promises, right? Now, to be fair, these are averages, so some people do much better, some people do worse, but on average, it's 7 to 12%, and for the scaling toolkits, or the scaling frameworks, 3 to 5%. Barely measurable. Still reasonably positive on average. So we have some room to improve. What might be the thing to look at. So like I said, this data is not coming from me. This is coming from somebody that does not have an axe to grind in this battle. So I thought that was interesting. So why? Why does this happen? Well, the first thing is context counts. This is a spider chart or a radar chart that I like to show people, and we do exercises around this and all that sort of stuff. So we can use this at the team level, at the organization level. And it's one interesting thing that I've always found in 100% of the times that I have shown this to an executive at a Fortune 500 company or at a government agency, the only response I have ever received to this graph is, "Oh my God, we've got all of this." That's the only response I've ever received from executives, right? And the challenge is that different teams, the reason why they have all of this is different teams are in different situations. So a large team will work differently than a small team. Ken was talking about that this morning. A team in a regulatory situation, like a life-critical regulatory situation, will work much differently than a team that is not in a regulatory situation. A team that's globally distributed will work much differently than a team that is in a single room. Blatantly obvious stuff. So if you're looking for one process to rule them all, sort of like some sort of Sauron type of a strategy, ain't gonna work. Predictable processes, prescriptive approaches will not work. Unfortunately, a lot of the Agile rhetoric is around the simple situations. Let's have small, and that's good advice, right? Keep the problem as simple as you possibly can. So let's have small teams, let's co-locate them as much as we can, let's take on simple problems, let's avoid the regulatory stuff, blah, 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 blah. All wonderful advice. Sadly, very few teams are actually in this situation. Like I said, I used to do a lot of research, and one of the questions I looked into was how many teams are actually in that situation, and it's less than 10%. So 90% of Agile teams are somewhere, at least along one of these curves, or along one of those vertices. Fair enough. Okay, and I'm sure many of you are now looking at this going, well, my team is here, here, and here, right? And what's interesting is that when you start rating yourself along these vertices and then fill in the blanks, you get a pen and connect the dots and then fill it all in, the shaded area of that graph would be the risk that your team faces. Bigger the area, the greater the risk, so you're going to act differently, you're going to behave differently depending on your situation. So these straightforward situations are rare. Do everything you possibly can to rework your situation to make it as easy and straightforward as possible, but then be prepared to behave accordingly depending on your situation. What's also interesting is if you choose to step back and think, you can very easily rate your situation against whatever you are, but you can also start rating the toolkits and the frameworks, these methods and frameworks, I should say, against these vertices. And then if you can find a framework that sort of matches your area, it might be a good fit for you. But if the risk mitigation strategy of the framework is different than the risk situation that you face, that framework is not a good fit. So adopting it might not be a good idea. Uh-oh, that doesn't match the marketing rhetoric. Warning, danger, Will Robinson, danger. For those of you old enough to know what that is, great. For those of you who have a subscription to Netflix, you've got to be very aware of what's going on in Lost in Space. They play down the robot too much, in my opinion. But anyways, so one process size does not fit all. So just like there are many different types of shoes and different sizes of shoes, we would not assume that something as simple as a shoe would fit all, okay? We know we better go try it on and walk around a bit and check it out. Same sort of thing with your process. Take it for a spin, check it out. You're going to need different process options. That makes life a little bit hard. So we need to think outside of the framework box. So if your organization is trying to do a transformation, it's hard work. As I believe we've heard from several speakers, it's really a journey, it's not a project. So one exercise that I like to do with executives when I get a chance is I work through who are your competitors. So we do the sticky note thing, and I'll get a room of executives at a company, and I'll get them to let's spend 5-10 minutes brainstorming who your competitors are. So they write one competitor per sticky, we put it on the wall. Then I introduce two categories. One category is who of all these competitors, who aren't you worried about? The other category is who keeps you up at night. So if you do this for a bank or for an insurance company, almost always the competitors at banks are completely unafraid of are other banks. Nobody's worried about competing against other banks or other financial institutions. It's been several years now since I've had an executive at a financial institution tell me that another financial institution keeps them up at night. But then the competitors that they are afraid of are these collection of companies that I call the apex predators, the Amazons and the eBays of the world. Because if you're a bank, you're worried about the fintechs. You're worried about Apple Pay. You're worried about all these other things. You're not worried about Bank of America or whoever the local banks are here. Nobody's worried about those companies. They're just like us. They're no good. That's the attitude. I've heard it. I've heard executives. I'm not worried about those people. They're just as bad as we are. Deathly afraid of Apple. So how do the apex level competitors improve? Do you think they adopt frameworks? No. And that's actually the wonderful thing about that exercise is then when I get to the point where I can detect, who they're not afraid of and who they are afraid of, then my next question is, so of these two categories, who do you think is adopting the Agile frameworks and who do you think is doing something else? Well, the companies that we're not afraid of, they're the ones that are adopting all the frameworks. Yeah, I know that. So maybe we shouldn't do that. So instead, what are they doing? They're doing something called Kaizen, continuous improvement. Let's learn in small steps. Let's experiment, see what works for us, and then adopt the stuff that works. So they follow a process like this. I'm just going to put that out. So they identify a problem. They identify potential ways to solve that problem. They pick one or more strategies. They then experiment with them. They assess their effectiveness. They adopt what works. They abandon the stuff that doesn't work. And if they're polite, they share with others, including, obviously, at least their own organization, or certainly, and maybe even with others. So it's your classic plan, do, study, act in a little more detail. All good stuff. So one thing I want to point out, the apex predators, they exist in chaos. So earlier, one of the other speakers was talking about Cont, wonderful complexity framework, or a wonderful framework. And the thing about Cont is when you're operating in chaos, you've basically got to try something out, see what works. Very few of you are actually in that situation. We like to think we are, but we really aren't. We're really in complex situations. So we can learn from others. So let's keep that in mind. So this is a wonderful way of working, and this is where fail fast comes in. So, let's identify something that works, experiment with it, and fail as fast. Let's learn as fast as we possibly can. This is what fail fast is all about. We can do better than that. Okay, so the productivity improvement from this sort of approach looks like this. This is why the apex predators are so scary. The Amazons and eBays of the world have been improving for 10, 15, 20 years now. Because at some point in the distant past, they decided to get better. They realized we are in a hyper-competitive situation and we would like to survive. So 20 years ago, remember how many e-commerce firms there were? There's all these companies competing with Amazon. It wasn't clear that Amazon was going to win. There was all these search engine companies. It wasn't clear that Google was going to win. They just decided to win. They decided to get better faster than everybody else. And they decided to keep doing it. And now all these companies, and it's wonderful they're doing this, they're sharing their strategies with us. And the reason why they do this is because they know it took them years to get to where they are. So if all you do is copy what they do, it will take you years to catch up. And because they're still improving, they're still on this path, they will be years ahead of you still. So they share widely. They don't care because they know you can't catch up following the same strategy that they have. You need to do better if you want to compete against the apex predators, if you want to become an apex predator. So failing slowly, like why do we fail fast? Well, failing slowly is expensive. Right? This is what the traditional community is all about. We can spend years sometimes and projects blow up in our face. So failing slowly is a phenomenally expensive way to learn, if we learn at all. So failing fast is better. So failing fast costs a lot less. It enables learning and it reduces risk. This is a good thing. Woohoo, fail fast. How do we do better than that? How do we do a lot better than that? These are good, important questions that we should be asking ourselves. Because if we're only failing fast, which I appreciate can be a hard thing for your organization to adopt, you're not even at the failing fast level yet, that's wonderful. But if we're all failing fast, then that becomes the norm. The apex predators are ahead of you on that, years ahead of you on that. You're still prey. Not an apex predator, you're prey. So, another question I want to ask, and this is a harsh one because I appreciate there's a lot of Agile coaches in the room, but is let's fail fast a great way for Agile coaches to say, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm in over my head. That's a harsh observation. So let's just think about that, and you'll come along with me in this in a minute. And one of the things that we like to quote in the failing fast, community, is Edison. He was a reasonably smart person, came up with a few inventions over the years, and one of his quotes is, "I haven't failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." So the failing fast crowd will often spin failing as, well, we haven't failed, we've learned something. Okay, fine. Good, yeah, you have. You've learned what doesn't work. Maybe we could have learned that in an easier and even faster, less expensive way. So the challenge that I found, and this might be one of the reasons why some of your organizations are still struggling with fail fast, is the people who are paying the bills aren't very tolerant of this fail fast idea. They buy into it's better than failing slowly. That's something they understand because they have failed slowly and expensively over the years. But why the heck are they paying you to fail? That's hard to describe to the executives, particularly the executives that actually have to sign the checks, right? So maybe we can do better. So Isaac Newton was also a reasonably smart person. And one of his famous quotes is, if I've seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulder of giants. Well, maybe we could do that too. There's an interesting thought. Maybe we could stand on the shoulders of giants. How do we do that? So even though you're in a unique situation, you're a unique people, you're on a unique team working for a unique company, you're in a unique situation, we all are. Look around if you don't believe me. You're dealing with problems that have been faced and almost always overcome by thousands of teams before you. Yes, you're unique, but what you're really doing is you've got a unique combination of stuff, and other people have dealt with that stuff in the past. So if we could leverage their learnings, we don't have to make as many mistakes. We don't have to fail as often. We can reduce our failure rate. As a result, we can succeed earlier. If we're failing less, we're succeeding more. Okay? So I would argue that succeeding early is better than failing fast. So how do we do that? Okay, so there's some observations, got you thinking a bit. Now let's get into solutioning mode. So a technique that we've been working on for the last few years and applying in many organizations around the world is something called guided continuous improvement. And it's an extension of the classic Kaizen approach, and it's based on a few observations. So first, sometimes our experiments fail. We're always going to have a few failures, and that's okay, and we want to learn from them, but it's still a failure. Still a failure. So let's improve on that. So failing fast is great. I would rather succeed earlier. So how do we do that? So the second step is the problem child. If we can get better at identifying a potential solution that will work in the context that we face, we have a greater chance of succeeding. We don't have to randomly try crap until something works. We can increase our chance of success. Now, we can do this if we have access to an experienced Agile coach, and this is how Agile coaches sell themselves, including myself. This is how we sell ourselves. We've been there, we've done that, we know what we're talking about. The problem is, do you have budget to hire an Agile coach? Do you actually know how to hire an Agile coach? A lot of people claiming to be Agile coaches. There's probably 10 times as many people claiming to be a good Agile coach as are actually good Agile coaches. Everybody hangs out their single. I've seen people with several months of Agile experience and suddenly they're an Agile coach somehow. Right? And I'm amazed by this. And they get away with it, good for them. So I have a young daughter, and she's 9 years old. So she hasn't done this yet. I'm sure she eventually will. What would happen if she was to come to me and says, Dad, I want to learn how to play soccer. I want to go play soccer. Okay, fine. Here's a ball. Go kick it around, right? That's my level of knowledge of soccer, football, European football. So I know nothing about soccer. Yeah, you kick a ball around, you got to get it in the net. I know that, but that's about it. I don't know how to play soccer. I wouldn't be a very good coach at that. But I know enough, knowing almost nothing about soccer, I know enough to look for a soccer coach who has played soccer for many years, who maybe has some coaching experience, maybe even has a story to tell. I played soccer since I was 4 years old, and I worked my way up, and I played on a rep league, and then in my teenage years, I blew my knees out, and now I'm teaching, right? So I'm looking for a story like that, right? I know enough to look for that. Knowing nothing about soccer, I know how to hire that. Well, why wouldn't I expect the same of my coaches, right? So anyway, so there's a hint for those of you who are struggling with hiring Agile coaches. So anyways, if you can get an Agile coach, good for you. Leverage them, keep them around for as long as you possibly can. Problem is, they're very hard to find, and they're expensive when you do find them. Another approach would be if we had some sort of knowledge base, and if we learned how to work with that knowledge base, maybe we could find a way to identify potential things to experiment easier. And yes, having humans involved, and definitely having an experienced coach with a knowledge base, even better. But anyway, so there's ways we can do this. So how would that work? So what happens if we can reduce the number of failed experiments, if we succeed more often, then our improvement curve goes up. If you're not and you can do this if you're not on the leading edge. So the Amazons, the eBays of the world, they're sort of stuck. They really are at the lead. They really are on the edge. They have to come up, they're the ones that have to come up with new ideas and experiment with them, and they'll have a higher failure rate, but that's okay. They're so far ahead of us, it doesn't matter. The rest of us, we can leverage the learnings of others. I would argue this is why there's conferences like this, so that people can come and share their techniques with us. That's awesome. We can leverage the learnings of others. And there's far more learnings than what you're going to get at a one-day conference. And that's okay. Okay, so let's work through an example. And we're going to look through exploring scopes. When we're producing a solution for stakeholders, how do we explore scope? That's the question. Well, we just go off and write some epics and user stories, okay? When you know almost nothing about scope exploration, about requirements gathering, then the answer is epics and stories, because that's what everybody wants to sell you. And that's okay. So first step, so when we're exploring scope, what types of questions, what types of issues, what do we have to think about when we're exploring the scope for a new product or for an existing product? One important question is how will people use our solution? And epics and stories are one way of answering that question. What type of information should we collect? Many systems have data. What business process does it support? How do we add value to our customers? Interesting question. There's different ways we can answer that. And a bunch of other questions. So exploring scope is actually a fairly sophisticated thing to do. This is why people will go to school for at least months, if not years sometimes, to become business analysts, to get the skills to do this stuff. This is an important thing. Many, many books have been written about this. Many workshops exist. A lot of sophistication here. Then when we're trying to answer a question, well, what types of techniques could we apply to solve this issue? So when I want to explore the issue of how do people use this system or use this solution, well, maybe we could write up epics. It's not a bad technique. Or maybe we could be outcome focused, and there's wonderful religious debates now about should we be focusing on outcomes or epics, and my epic can beat up your outcome and vice versa. Yeah, angels dancing on heads of pins. Personas are a great technique, as are stories, and of course many others. And this list is certainly not complete, but it's not a bad list, and it's certainly more than the, epics and stories and woohoo, good to go. Sometimes these lists, what's interesting, so putting together these options that we have to address some of these important questions that we have to address, sometimes we discover that we've got a little bit of a maturity model going on. So for example, when it comes to what level of detail should we drive these requirements to, or should we capture these requirements, sometimes an overview, like sketches and post-it notes or index cards, are more than good enough. So do the least amount of work possible. Sometimes we need to have light specifications. We might be in a regulatory environment. We might be in a situation where we're communicating information to somebody who's not in the same room with us. So we might have to develop a light spec. Maybe we're in a situation where we have some reasonably complex logic, and we got to work it out on a paper first, and then work on it. Sometimes very detailed specifications are important. I've worked in life critical. I worked on medical devices. Worked with a team building pacemaker software, for keeping you alive type stuff. The spec, if we'd printed it out, probably would have been 300 or 400 pages, easily several hundred. That was the minimum we needed in order to stay out of jail, right? Because in a life critical regulatory situation, you need to have a little more documentation than in a non-regulatory situation, if you want to avoid major fines and killing people, or at least avoiding jail for killing people. I mean, be more clear about that. And sometimes no documentation at all, no sort of requirement specification, no sort of capturing of other in a little conversation is sufficient. And what I'm getting at here is that the strategies towards the top of this list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom. Now, your mileage may vary because everybody's in a different situation, and a couple of these techniques will toggle back and forth. But for the most part, strategy, when you see an arrow, strategies towards the top of the list, generally better than the strategies towards the bottom. So what does this play out to? So in the Discipline Agile Toolkit, we start providing maps. So remember when we started talking about exploring scope, what questions do we need to answer? That's what those square rectangles are all about. And then what are possible techniques that we could consider applying to address the question. So different teams in different situations will have a different combination of techniques. And that's okay. Enable your teams to do the best that they can in the situation that they face, and maybe even get better over time. Enable them to improve. Allow them to improve. Enable them to improve. Empower them, or whatever you want to call that. So exploring scope is a complex topic. People go to school for a long time to figure this stuff out. So I'm not saying that you're going to become an expert requirements person overnight just by looking at this little diagram, but at least you can start making better decisions. At least you know you've got choices, And in some cases, some choices are better than others. So maybe you can start making more intelligent decisions. And of course, there's some details in behind all this that I'll show later. This is something we call a process goal diagram. This is basically a decision tree with a little bit of, with that maturity model stuff, the arrows added in. So if the modelers among us may or may not appreciate that. So how do we apply this stuff in practice? How do we enable teams and enable organizations to choose their own way of working, to own their own process? One of the philosophies in the Agile community is that teams should be allowed to own their own process. You should be able to choose the way that you work. How do you do that? That's a good question, because you're not process experts. So teams should own their own process. There's many different ways we can do this, and I'll show you a few more in a bit. But let's work through an example. How do we actually apply that fancy diagram I just showed you? Okay, so here we are, we're in a retrospective, and we've got a problem. So this team that I'm on, we've just released a new release of our app into the marketplace just a couple weeks ago perhaps, and the millennials aren't adopting it. And they're an important part of our potential target base, and we're being ignored. They're downloading it, looking at it, not using the app. We got a problem, serious problem. So what happens? So we reflect on the problem. We hold a retrospective. We talk it out. Okay? But sadly, we're just a group of techies. We don't have, we got a requirements problem here, but we don't have experienced requirements people on the team. We've taken a couple, the product owner's taken a product owner course, and that, but they're not requirements experts, right? They haven't invested the years they would need to be good at this. So we clearly need to understand what millennials want. They're looking at it, but they're not biting, right? They're not buying our app or using it. So, and we don't have any existing customers who are millennials. We got nobody to talk to. And our product owner is nobody to work with. We don't know any of these millennials, young punks. They're all off eating avocado toast or something, right? No. Anyways, okay, boomer. I'm not a boomer. But anyways, almost though. So our teams never run into this problem, including our coach. So you've got this Agile coach and, let's fail fast. Okay, so what do? Well, we look at the diagram. Oh, look, we got a usage problem. Maybe we should consider one of these usage techniques. Duh. And we do a little bit of reading. And we realize, so we can either go and use the online tool, or we can use the book, Choose Your Wow. And we run into this table, because the challenge here is we don't really have a lot of experience exploring usage. So we do a little bit of reading. So we open the chapter up in the book, or go online, look at the tool, look at the web page. And we look at the table. Hey, personas, that looks interesting. Maybe that'll work. Oh, here's the trade-offs associated with personas. Sort of smells like it's going to work. And there's a reference we can follow. Click on if it's the web page. There's a reference we can follow for more information if it's not blindingly obvious what a persona is. So let's experiment with personas. Sounds like it's going to work. We don't have to make stuff up. We don't have to randomly guess. We got a much better chance. Did a little bit of reading. Had to traverse, a complicated diagram. Had to traverse that. Had to know the diagram existed. That's probably the real problem. If we know the diagram exists, we can read it, then we can probably narrow down our choices, increase the chance of succeeding. That's the entire idea. Of course, there's many different ways we can evolve our wow. So just like we give you choices for the work that you do, we also provide choices for the work that we're advising you on. How do you evolve your wow? Well, adopt the techniques that make the most sense for you. Several people talked about value stream mapping today, and the values of communities of excellence, and communities of or centers of excellence, communities of practice, and coaching, and training, and many, many other good things. So there's a lot of techniques there that you could possibly use to transform your teams and help them evolve their way of working, if you choose to. So, how do we break out of methods prison? That's where we started. Let's break out of jail here. So our philosophy is start where you are, because where you are is where you are, right? So this is where we're going to start. So maybe you're mostly traditional, maybe you're doing Scrum, maybe you're doing Safe, maybe you're doing something else. That's okay. Good for you. We want to do the best that we can in the situation that we face. My experience is that we can point fingers and, oh, you evil waterfall people, you. We can point fingers all we want, but those are smart people doing the best that they can in the situation that they face based on their value system, based on what they believe they're allowed to do, and based on their existing culture. So we should respect that. And let's help them a bit. So we should always strive to get better, because that's what the apex predators do. So how do we do that? So whatever your current wow is, regardless of what it is, doesn't really matter. That's where you are. Let's get you on this path with continuous guided improvement. Now, it wasn't obvious, but in all those charts, none of them presume, I'll go back a few slides, my apologies. None of them presume where you currently are. So the best that you could do right now for managing your work might be a product backlog. Might be, we call it a work item list because we want to be more agnostic, but it might be a product backlog. Well, there's other ways that are generally more effective than that. But that's the best you can do right now. Okay? Or maybe you're here. Maybe it's a work item list. Maybe it's effectively unmanaged, the more traditional ways of working. But that's okay. There's better ways that we can work. Nothing wrong with that. Do the best that you can right now and recognize, hey, maybe there's something better. Maybe we're missing a few things. So let's always strive to get better. So let's get on this path. So we need to start looking beyond the simplistic answers. Don't get me wrong, I love Scrum. I think it's great. But any time I've ever implemented some sort of Scrum-based approach in an existing organization, we always had to look at a bigger picture, right? Because we're not a small little team doing our own thing. We're a team that's interacting with other teams, that's in an existing ecosystem. We have constraints. We have advantages. We have to work with other teams. We have to conform to guidelines. We have to conform to industry regulations. We have to conform to existing organizational ways of working and existing cultures. Our team is being governed. Whatever we produce will eventually go into operations and be run and supported as part of an overall value stream. More than likely, we are working on the new release of something that already exists, so we're getting change requests coming in from production at all points in time. Those are new requirements that should be taken care of. Along the bottom here are lightweight risk-based milestones. If you can't answer the question to your executives, how are we going to govern these agile teams? How are we going to allow teams to own their own process and work in their own unique way? If you cannot also say, oh, and by the way, senior management, here's how you can govern these teams, all of whom are working differently. This idea of allowing teams to own their own process will not fly in about 95% of organizations. Because the last thing executives want to hear is everybody is going to work differently. It's what they need to hear. But if you don't ask them the answer, how the heck can we govern? How the heck can we guide and lead these teams? They're not going to go for this. So we provide a consistent, still flexible approach to governance. And I appreciate governance as a swear word for many Agilists, but you are being governed. I believe you deserve to be governed well. I observe in most organizations you are not being governed well. So we need to work with the governance folks and give them a strategy to govern us. Otherwise, they will make stuff up and they will fail fast as well. Or they'll fail slowly, maybe fast, but it's still failure, and we're on the receiving end of that failure. Not fun. So we need to embrace the complexity that we actually face. Look at the whole picture, and this is just the whole picture from the point of view of beginning to end solution delivery. It's not the full value stream, of course. We'll look at that in a few minutes. We also have to allow teams to choose the most appropriate life cycle. There are many different ways of working. We can have agile project teams and lean project teams. We can have agile product long-standing teams doing continuous delivery and lean teams doing this. We can have exploratory teams doing some sort of a lean startup approach, even within our own existing organization. We can even do the evil serial waterfall approach because our organizations are hybrids. Ken was talking about that this morning. Our organizations are hybrids. We're still going to have some teams doing traditional because that makes sense in the situations that they face. We may even have large programs, teams of teams, and that's okay. So choose the right approach for the situation that you face. And we also need to look beyond the team. So I'm going to ask everybody to raise their hands. Okay, so your Agile team or your lean team, whatever you're doing, the existing team that you're working with right now, this is the perspective that I want you to give when I ask these questions. And when you answer the questions by raising your hand as high as you can, look around you and see how many other people are also raising their hands. So your team, to succeed, do you have to work with your HR department, maybe to hire people or to give people raises or get them training? Anybody on teams, raise their hands up. Not everybody can see and it's dark. Okay, or did you have to work with finance to get funding for your team? Bunch of hands are going up. Did you have to work with the security folks to write secure stuff and conform to whatever wacky things they want to do? Do you have to work with the enterprise architects or your architecture team in order to do whatever they want to do and help you? I hope they're helping you. That's my hope. You have to work with the data folks to change things in the database and to roll out changes to the database and get access to data and stuff like that. Do you have to work with procurement to buy new equipment or to hire contractors or whatever? Yeah. Do you have to work with the release management folks to get stuff into production? Did you have to work with the IT operations folks to get data back or get monitor or do whatever it is you got to do? Raise your hand if you had to work with another team that I haven't listed yet. Okay. Now here's where I'm going to ask you to do a lot of work. I apologize for this, and I realize a lot of people, it's going to be hard. I would like you to stand if you didn't answer yes to at least one of those questions. Now, some of you are too lazy to raise up your hands. I appreciate that. But please stand now if you did not raise your hand or should have raised your hand at least once. So please stand. Make it easy for people to see. That gentleman, 1, 2, small percentage. Doing rough math, that looks like 2 to 3%. Do we agree? Uh-oh. I broke the mic. Luckily, I can do this. Do we all agree that was about 2 to 3%? Yeah. My research has shown, oh, thank you, because I'm too useless to put it on myself. Okay. Research I did a few years ago showed that only 3 to 4% of teams were in a situation where they actually did not have to do that. Okay, thank you. I almost broke his mic. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Okay. Only 3 to 4% of teams are in a situation where they're actually whole. How many people have heard an Agile coach or an Agile guru say all your teams should be whole? Yes, you heard it this morning from Ken. That's a great strategy, by the way, but it rarely happens. We have to actually interact with other teams to get the job done. Perfectly fine. So let's do that well. Now, an interesting implication of this, though, is that if I want to do an Agile transformation, if I want to, if I'm at the very beginnings and we're trying to get this Agile team over here doing Scrum or whatever, I darn well better be prepared to interact with these other teams and at least start helping them to become Agile, or at least asking them, could you please get out of my way? Could you please give us a break? Right? Give us a pass and allow us to succeed, and then a few months from now, we'll figure out how to interact with you more effectively. Either please step up and interact with us and help us to help you, or get out of the way. And that get out of the way message is often hard. That's a hard message to get across. Now, the only way we can do that is if we're respectful and if we appreciate. If I don't know anything about finance, the finance people will think I'm an idiot. They'll think I'm an absolute idiot for all this wacky Agile finance stuff beyond budget, yada, yada, yada. Sounds like crazy talk. Okay, we have to appreciate and understand what the financial people are dealing with, and the data management people, and their architects, and so on, in order to have an intelligent conversation with them. And we need to be respectful of their existing way of working, and their existing culture, and their existing mindset. So making fun of waterfall making fun of project managers and whatever, and make data managers, whatever else we want to make fun of, might not be the way to go for us. We also need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look beyond software development. So look at the value stream, and Ken was talking about that this morning, so I'm not gonna belabor his point. He's right. We need to look at the bigger overall flow. How do we bring value to our customers? Of course, there's a bigger picture than this. We really need business agility because most organizations have multiple value streams. So how the heck do we support multiple value streams? So yes, we might want to start with how do we be agile? Earlier talking about multiple ways of teams being agile. But to do that, to really support business agility, we have to have a foundation. We have to have a mindset. And we have to, that's going to bring some agile concepts into play. It's going to bring some lean concepts into play. We all have to start with the same sort of beginnings. And we're not there yet. The financial people, the architects, the data management folks, the security folks, they might not have an agile mindset yet. So we need to help them. And it's not a software development thing, by the way. This is a business. This is a non-software thing. One of the wonderful learnings I'm having working with PMI is that the majority of stuff out there isn't software. People are building houses and buildings and many, many other things, and they can be more agile. They can be leaner too. But if you just come to them talking about software, they'll tune you out almost instantly. So the finance people doesn't want to hear about the wonders of software development. They want to talk about money. You'd better be prepared to shut up about software and be prepared to focus on money and all the implications of that. And of course, DevOps is a good thing. A little more to it than CI/CD, by the way. And then we get to the value stream point. There's a lot to value streams. We saw that in that high-level workflow. This is more of a static view for the process wonks among us. And then how do we support these value streams? So, how do we support, how does HR, people management, how does IT governance support this? How does governance in general, how does legal, procurement, sales? And yes, there's different ways we can do this. But how do we help those groups become more agile? And they're not software people, and they probably never will be, and that's okay. But they can still be more agile. They can still be more effective. We can learn together. We can improve together. We have to. Because there's a heck of a lot more to the value stream than software. And there's some value streams which involve almost no software whatsoever. I'm not sure, there was a pretty interesting value stream today of feeding us lunch. Not sure how much software was involved there, certainly not in the execution of it. Maybe there was some planning software involved. Maybe, or maybe it's just paper checklists. I don't know. Doesn't matter to me. I got fed. Thank you very much. Good food. Okay, so it's opportunity there. So let's choose to observe these things. So some parting thoughts before I take questions and go out and have drinks. So I would argue that the methods and frameworks out there are really giving you a fish. They're feeding you for a day. They're solving a problem, but they're putting you in method jail, which is great. You got to eat. You got to survive, right? So this is good. That's a good starting point. Start where you are. DA, I actually had a very good conversation earlier today with one of the other speakers. He was asking me, how the heck, why is DA different than SAFe? And I said, well, a completely different mindset. DA is all about teaching you how to fish. How the heck do you break out of method jail? How do you improve? What are your options? So instead of just saying, oh, yes, art of the possible, you can change, you can do anything you want. Well, that's cute, but how the heck do you do it? What are my options? Well, hire me, I'm a consultant. That's basically the answer. When you step back and observe the message, that's basically the answer. Hire the coaches, which is great. I used to be a coach. I fully appreciate that. Hire as many coaches as you need. But we still need to do better. So how do we become an apex predator? That's the answer. That's what we're trying to answer here. So I would argue you got to make a choice. Do you want to be an apex predator, or do you want to be the prey of the apex predators? I'm from Canada. We recently changed our banking laws to allow non-financial institutions to process financial transactions. That is phenomenally scary to the banks. That's their bread and butter. The apex predators are now entering the market. And we know how that generally goes for the prey. You introduce a wolf to the park, you introduce a wolf pack to the park, suddenly all the rabbits disappear. Don't know why. Okay, this is the challenge we've got. So like I said, start where you are. Whatever your current wow is, whatever your current way of working, wonderful for you. Start where you are. I assume you're doing the best that you can in the situation you face, but we should always try to get better. And the way we can do that at the team level is through guided continuous improvement. At the organization level, it's a slightly different story, which I didn't tell today. But at the team level, which most of us are at, I would suggest you start with guided continuous improvement. Up your game. Succeed early. So Discipline Agile is sort of like a get out of jail almost free card. You guys still got to do a little bit of learning, but that's okay. So those of you who remember Monopoly. So anyways, ta-da.